Hey, good evening, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I would like to thank one of our subscribers, Scratch My Ass. He sent me an email earlier today talking about the U.S. debt and the $22 trillion. And he says that, and he did the calculations on this. He says that if you take $1 every $100 every second, it would take 6,976 years to get to $22 trillion. And I thought about it, I was like, holy moly. So that's like $1,000 a second would still take like 700 years or close to it. Anyway, I was just blown away by that. Anyway, I thought I'd come out and do a review of monetary policy, and because a lot of you who follow me on this channel know that I read a lot up on the Federal Reserve and the speeches that they give on monetary policy. And during the quantitative easing program during the 2008 financial crisis, the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates down to zero, and they knew that they were going to run into this issue, right, where they were going to have this run into what they refer to as the lower bound, where the federal fund rate is at zero. Now, if you're not familiar with the federal fund rate, that is the rate that the big banks loan money to each other on an overnight basis. So it's kind of like the basis for interest rates, and whatever the Fed fund rate does, so does all the rest of the interest rates that you get for like home loans and credit cards and whatnot. So if they could drop those Fed fund rates, then that'll get home loans and credit cards and auto loans and everything else out there cheaper for people to get, or the payments on them, and therefore they can go off and buy a lot more stuff. All right, so dropping interest rates is what stimulates the economies, or that's what the Federal Reserve uses. Now, during the recessions, typically they would drop interest rates around 5%, right? Now, a recession is determined by, 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. So if they ran into a recession, they would drop interest rates down around 5%. This would get the economy all stimulated again with the new loans. So back in 2002, they knew that they were going to run into the lower bound, where they're going to drop interest rates down to zero, and they knew that they were going to have to stimulate the economy somehow. And so they started coming up with some ideas on how they were going to do this. Now, one of them is that they could just purchase, like, instead of buying like U.S. debt, they could buy up like foreign debt. They could buy, like, print up money and buy up like Eurozone or Japanese debt or whatever. So this was one of the ideas. Another one is that they could buy long-term treasuries at any volume to maintain a particular interest rate on them. One of the other ideas, and this one was kind of difficult to wrap your head around, but it came out from John Williams, the Federal Reserve president of the Bank of New York, Federal Reserve. He did a speech on this one, and this one's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but remember, they know that they're going to run into the lower bound, right? Which is zero. And the Federal Reserve is mandated to do two things, right? They're mandated to maintain interest rates, maintain price stability, which is a 2% inflation rate. And they're mandated to keep employment at full employment, right? Keep the economy rolling at full employment, or keep unemployment very low, right? They're supposed to keep a low unemployment and stable price inflation. That's their mandate. So when it comes to stimulating the economy again, when we roll into the next recession and they drop interest rates, typically they would drop them around 5%, but they can't do that this time. They only have them at 2.5%, and they're not raising them any farther than this. So they knew back in 2002 that they were going to do this. That's when they came up with some of these ideas. So what they thought of, or at least what John Williams is suggesting, is that you run the economy incredibly hot during this time. And then when you roll into the next recession and you drop interest rates down and you hit that lower bound, you're not going to be able to stimulate the economy like you could before. So people aren't going to be running out there and taking out new loans and doing all the other stuff like they did before, right? So hopefully during the good times, you ran inflation higher than you would normally. Like normally you would want to keep them at 2%. And if you got them higher than 2%, then you would try and raise interest rates to maintain that 2% inflation, so that inflation doesn't go out of control. But what they're saying is you go ahead and let it get out of control a little ways, because when you do roll into the next recession and you get these 2 quarters of negative growth, the inflation is going to start coming down, and hopefully you can roll in and out of the next recession because you've had it high enough previously to that you'll maintain an average rate of 2% inflation. Does that make sense, guys? So you roll the economy hot, and then when you go into the recession, the inflation that drops down, hopefully it'll drop down and it'll probably go past the 2%, but hopefully the long-term average will be 2%. Then you'll roll in and out of the next recession, and then again, you roll this cycle over again. So they're maintaining a long-term 2% inflation rate as opposed to a right now inflation rate. Does that make sense? Anyway, out of all these speeches that I read, all of them up until even just recently, all of them say the same thing. One of their major tools that they are going to use when interest rates are low and they won't be able to stimulate the economy is going to be communication. Credible threats. Okay? This is what Ben Bernanke said that they were going to use back in 2002. It's what they say in the speeches all up until today. Okay, they use different terms for it: transparency, interaction with the community. The big one was credible threats. That was the one that I found, because that was the one that Ben Bernanke used back in 2002. And the way he described credible threat was something like this: a guy invents a gold machine. Okay, and with this gold machine, he's going to be able to produce as much gold as he wants. The moment that information makes it out into the news, into the markets, the price of gold would immediately drop. Even before the guy produces a single ounce of gold, the price of gold in the markets would plummet. Okay? That credible threat alone is enough to move markets. And that's what they're using today. And you can see it. Like just recently, we saw home mortgage loans drop, a full percentage point. The Federal Reserve has done nothing with their monetary policy, right? For months, they didn't change a thing, right? Everything that they had done previously to the few months before has gone on exactly the same way as it always has. But yet you're seeing changes in the market with every statement they make, right? That's the credible threat that they're talking about. That is the number one tool that they will use until it no longer works. And by dropping interest rates, they will lose the credible threat, because that is what they are using right now to manipulate the markets. We're going to drop them. No, we're not. Yes, we are. Right? They have gotten the interest rates up to the point that they now have the credible threat that they need. And like I said, they're going to use it until it no longer works. Anyway, that was a review of monetary policy. Uneducated Economist. We'll talk to you later.